Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to be painting yet another Footsore miniature. This is a Saxon noble that will be in my Dux Britanniarum campaign coming up shortly. I believe he is the King of Northumbria, and I love the dramatic pose here, so much so that I put him on a nice rock mold here, and I'm planning to have him kind of standing amidst the crashing waves on the sea. I think that will look really cool. This is one of my favorite Footsore miniature models, I think. So anyway, let's just go in and I will show you how I painted this model. So as always, I'm going to be starting here painting the skin tones, and I'm going to be laying down a nice base of some scale 75 colors here. I'm taking the African Shadow. I mix in a little bit of pink flesh and then a little bit of scarlet red in there to get this initial color. And I'm going to cover all of the skin areas with this, and I'm going to water it down quite a bit and do several coats till I get nice even coverage. For the next layer, I just take the pink skin tone, again by scale 75, and I'm going to cover most of the areas, only leaving the areas in deep recess, that initial base color, the areas near around his eyes and the folds underneath his cheek and between his fingers, things like that. And then I take a little bit of golden flesh, mix it into the pink skin tone, and now I'm going to hit a little bit less of his skin, focusing on areas I know that will be catching light. The top of his forehead, his nose, his cheeks, his eyelids, and the knuckles on his hands and fingers. Then I'm going to go in with the pale skin tone by scale 75, and now I'm only going to pick a few spots that I really want to draw attention to on the skin, and I'm going to stipple them on there, making little dots. Again, the edge of his nose, top of his little eyebrow there, his cheek, places like that. And with the skin tone done, we are going to move on to painting all these steel and iron areas of his armor. So we're starting off with a gunmetal metallic color from Vallejo. And then I am overbrushing all of his chainmail using the side of my brush there with some silver by Vallejo metal colors. And then I'm taking some Vallejo metal color chrome, and I'm picking a few spots on his chainmail that I want to draw attention to, and really loading that color into the area, even making it go in between the links to draw your eye. Then I'm reinforcing the shadows here by going back in with that gunmetal color by Vallejo, and hitting all the areas that I don't think light will be catching. And now we will move on to the brass portions of his armor. I'm using Vallejo metal color copper, and I'm going to be covering all the scales here on his chest, and also the hilt of his sword. Now I am taking P3 gold and I'm overbrushing the scales, hitting most of it, only neglecting the areas kind of at the top of each of the scales so that some of that copper does show through. And now I'm taking that skin tone wash and covering the gold, just knock down the color, bring in a little bit more shadow onto the scale. Last thing I'm going to do is highlight certain areas on the scale mail with some white, and I'm just going to touch it, dab it on the edges of certain scales to draw your eye. Now we are going to move on to painting the inside of his cloak here. I'm going to go for a very dark purple. So I took some black, mixed it in with purple, and I'm just sketching in the areas I want to be in shadow. Next, I am taking a violet color and I'm just going to sketch in where I want the highlights to be. Right now, there is a pretty harsh transition between the dark purple and this lighter color, but after a few applications of a violet glaze, transition will look a little bit better. Now I'm kind of wet blending the two colors together between the dark purple and this lighter purple, mixing the two together, trying to get a little bit more smooth of a transition. Now I'm adding a little bit of white into that violet color, and I'm going to be focusing on this outer area of his cloak that is flapping in the wind. While the cloak is drying, I decided to go and paint his tunic here. I'm going to go for a nice gray-green, and I'm going to highlight up to almost a yellow. Deciding to go a little bit more pastel here with the green, since I want the cloak to kind of draw your eye. Now we're going back to his cloak. I added even a little bit more ivory into that violet color, and again I'm aiming it mostly towards the outer edges of his cloak. There is a little bit of a rounded nature to the cloak here, so I am focusing on that rounded edge to be the main highlight. Again, while the cloak is drying, I'm going to go and sketch in the shadows for his tunic here. And I took a little bit of purple and mixed it into that green color to give us the shadows. I do really like using purple as a shadow color for both green and yellow. I think it looks pretty good. And we'll go back over it too with the green color to kind of tone down some of the areas where it is that dark purple. And here I have a glaze of that pastel green, and I'm going to go back over some of those areas that I covered in that violet color so that there isn't such a harsh transition between the two colors. And now I'm taking a glaze of kind of the mid-tone color, that base violet, running it over the highlight just to draw those two colors together a little bit better. Then I added a little bit of Naples yellow into this pastel green color here. And now we're going to do the first pass of highlights, only hitting areas I know that will be catching light on his tunic. added even more yellow into the mix, and I'm hitting less and less of the tunic with some very thin paint, doing little striations, little hash marks to make a little bit of texture on his tunic. Then I added a little bit of ivory into that highlight color, and here again, only touching a few places that I want to be the high highlight of his tunic. Now we're going back to his cloak, and I'm going to glaze another violet layer along the edge of the highlight here to blend between the dark and light sections of the cloak. Now I'm going back to that highlight area, and I'm going back in with some violet mixed with a little bit of ivory. Adding a little bit more white to the mix, and making striations along the middle of that edge, that highlight there, just to show some texture and to break up the color transitions. Added even more ivory in, and again hitting less of his cloak, focus on that kind of center ridge. Now I take almost pure ivory, with only a hint of purple in there, and I'm just touching among the middle of those highlight areas. Just to tone it down and to ensure there isn't a harsh transition, I'll glaze back over it with some violet. And just to draw the contrast out a little bit more, I took almost some pure black, and I'm just going to bring a line around near his body and along the edge of his cloak. And now we are going to paint his pants. I'm going to use purple as the shadow color for this kind of burgundy red I'm going to be using. Again, I'm kind of keeping purple as like the color that kind of holds this piece together. I'm using a little bit of purple in most of the colors, at least of his clothing. So then I go and I take a little bit of some scarlet, mix it into the violet. And now I'm going to be going over all the pants with this, even the areas that I put down that violet color, just to blend the two colors together. Now I'm going with almost pure scarlet, and I'm just highlighting the folds of his pants. Then we're going to add a little bit of ivory into the scarlet and just make a few dots and streaks along his pants for the highlight color. I decided I wanted his tunic to be a little bit more ornate since, you know, he is one of my nobles. So I decided just to go and make some gold lines at the bottom of his tunic. Make it look like he has some embroidery there, which was common among the Dark Ages and late Antiquity era for wealthy soldiers. When I'm doing this, I try to keep the paint as thin as possible so it will run easily onto the model. And it's not a big deal if your lines are not completely straight or if they are wider in some areas. We will be going back and cleaning up the lines with some of that pastel green color. Now we're going to move on to his hair, and I'm going to go for a blonde color for his hair, but I'm actually going to start off with this burnt sienna, which is actually kind of a brownish red. I'm going to do several coats of this, making sure I have nice even coverage. Then I'm going to take some Naples yellow and I'm going to mix it in to that burnt sienna. And I'm going to use the side of my brush, cover most of his hair, only leave the areas that are in recess that original burnt sienna color. Now we're going to mix even more of that golden yellow into the burnt sienna, getting a very light brown. And again, I'm using the side of my brush, over brushing, hitting most of the hair, but focusing more on the ends of each kind of strand with this color. And now we're going in with that pure Naples yellow, and I'm hitting even less of the areas of his hair. Again, only areas that I know light will be striking, focusing most of the highlights on the edges of each strand. And then finally, I mixed in a little bit of white to that Naples yellow, and I'm just going to be making dots in a few places around his beard to focus attention as the highest highlight. Now we're going to paint the boots. I put down just a dark brown for the base color, and now I'm going to use that burnt sienna that I used for his hair as our first round of highlights all over the leather portions of his armor and his belt. I used a little bit of that yellow hair color that I had created, which was a mixture of the burnt sienna and the Naples yellow, and I'm going to be highlighting his boot and his belt. Now we're going to paint his fur cloak, and I'm going for kind of like a black bear fur here. So I'm taking a black that I watered down quite a bit, and I'm going to be covering the entirety of this fur cloak. Then I went and I mixed in a little bit of blue and a little bit of white into the black, creating this bluish gray. And I'm going to be overbrushing about 50% or so of this cloak with this color. And then I added a little bit of ivory into that mix, and I'm going to be hitting less and less of his cloak with it. Now we're getting pretty close to a off-white color with this mixture. I added even more ivory in, and here I'm just touching the edges of a few strands of fur as the high highlight for this cloak. And with that, we're actually done with the model, but now we're just going to paint his scenic base. So to paint this rock, I laid out a bunch of different grays, warm and cool grays. I'm just going to be placing them next to each other on this rock and then mixing them together so that there isn't just a consistent single tone to the rock. Rocks have many different colors all ingrained in different portions of it, and I want that to show here. So I'm taking like a cold gray, then a warm, lighter gray next to it, even here kind of an off-white color, and then I'm going to wet blend them together so that there are some transitions between the colors, but you don't have to be too careful here. We're going to be washing it and then dry brushing it, so again, if there's harsh transitions, won't be a big deal. After all, it is a rock, and rocks do have some harsh transitions between the colors. Once we got the entire rock covered in these gray colors, I watered down some black paint to create a wash, and we're going to go over the entirety of the rock mold with it. We wait for the wash to dry. Now I'm going over with a neutral kind of mid-tone gray, and I'm going to be over brushing most of the rock. If you notice here, I'm kind of going horizontally with my strokes, catching most of the rock edges, only leaving the areas that are in cracks and recesses, the darker gray color. And now I'm doing a true dry brush with a downward vertical stroke, hitting only those areas of the rock mold that are jutting out as the high highlight. Now we're going to move on to the water effects here. So I actually laid down a couple layers already of this Woodland Scenic's wave effects. I mix in a little bit of turquoise color into that coloring for the water. But I'm taking now just a clear coat of this Woodland Scenic's wave gel medium. I'm liberally putting it on the areas where I want the wave to crash. This will take several applications to build up the wave before I can really start making some cool splashing effects. While my layer of wave medium is drying, I thought I'd add some micro details to the rock here. So I'm going to put on some kind of lichen or moss on the rock using different types of flock. So first here I'm taking some fine-grained flock just to represent some algae. This is the burnt grass from Woodland Scenics, and I'm sprinkling it over the top. Then I'm taking some coarser stuff to represent more like moss, and I'm sticking it in a few alcoves around the rock. Now we're going to go with the final layer of our gel medium. And here I want it to look like that the wave is coming in and crashing off. So I want a kind of crescent silhouette to the wave here. So as I'm putting the wave medium on, I'm teasing it outwards, like the wave is smashing into the rock and then falling back into the sea. So here, this will take some finagling. You do want to do this in several layers before you attempt to add any curvature to your wave here. But with some patience, you can get a nice looking effect. So here from the side, you can see how it looks like the spray is coming off the rock. And now, finally, that the wave is dry, I'm going to take a little bit of white and I'm going to overbrush it onto the wave using the side of my brush to catch all of the ridges of this wave medium. Now finally, I'm going to cover the rock and all the waves in a gloss varnish, just to make it look a little more wet and reflective. And with that, we have finished our Saxon noble here. And man, this has to be one of my favorite models I've painted recently. I really especially like the base that I crafted for this guy. I kind of want to make him my warlord, even though I already made that model recently. But I can't say how much I've really enjoyed painting Footsore historical models recently. It had been a while since I'd been painting historicals, and it's good to get back into the groove with such excellent models. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll be back soon with some more videos. Take care.